One night, when I was just a kid, I decided to camp in my backyard. It was supposed to be a fun little adventure, but that night, someone was already out there, watching my tent in the dark. I was the middle child in my family. I had two brothers, one older and one younger. When we were kids, both of them were involved in scouting. My older brother Scott took it very seriously and eventually made it all the way to Eagle Scout. My younger brother joined for a short time, but he quit not long after starting. For some reason, though, my parents never pushed me to join the Scouts. Looking back, that always felt strange to me, because whenever my brother had Scout events, I remember feeling extremely jealous. Sometimes my mom would take me along when Scott had things like Pinewood Derby races or little troop celebrations. I would sit there watching all the Scouts in their uniforms and wishing I was one of them. But the thing I envied the most were the camping trips. The troop would go deep into the woods for entire weekends. They would set up tents, build campfires, and do all the things that felt like real adventures. Sometimes, I would even ride along when my parents dropped Scott off. I remember watching the boys unload their gear and set up tents. But since I wasn't part of the troop, I obviously couldn't stay. So I would just go back home. Watching those trips made me want to experience camping so badly. Before every trip, Scott would bring his tent home and practice setting it up in our backyard. One evening, when I was about 7 or 8 years old, I suddenly had what felt like the greatest idea ever. If I couldn't go on the Scout camping trips, why not just have one in our backyard? So that's exactly what we did. My brother helped set up the tent outside, and we planned to sleep in it overnight like a real camping trip. Our backyard was huge, and it didn't have fences like normal yards. Instead, there were thick trees and bushes separating the properties, which made it feel almost like a small forest around our house. We even had a fire pit. My parents played along and helped us start a small fire, so we could roast marshmallows and have the full camping experience. My little brother joined us for a while, but he was only 4 years old, so my parents didn't let him sleep in the tent. Eventually, they took him back inside and told Scott and me to get ready for bed. Back then, the Game Boy Advance SP was the handheld console everyone had. Once we climbed into our sleeping bags, we both pulled out our Game Boys and started playing. I was playing Super Mario Bros. 2, a game I was completely obsessed with. After a while, my eyes started getting heavy. I rolled onto my side and tried to fall asleep. But for some reason, I just couldn't. Maybe it was because I had never slept in a sleeping bag before. They honestly weren't very comfortable. Eventually, though, I must have fallen asleep, because at some point during the night, I suddenly woke up. For a few seconds, I was confused about where I was. The inside of the tent was dark and completely quiet. Then I remembered. We were camping. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I looked across the tent. Scott wasn't there. His sleeping bag was empty. The tent zipper was still closed, though, so I assumed he must have gone inside the house because he couldn't sleep. But the moment I realized I was alone, I felt a wave of fear. I didn't want to stay in the tent by myself, so I slowly crawled toward the zipper and started opening it. Before climbing out, I peeked outside for just a second, and that's when I saw him. Someone was sitting near the fire pit. It wasn't Scott. It was a grown man. He was sitting completely still in one of the chairs, facing the tent, and I'm certain he had already seen me looking out. I gasped quietly and zipped the tent shut as fast as I could. Then I dove back into my sleeping bag like that thin fabric could somehow protect me. I stayed perfectly still. The tent was almost completely black inside except for faint moonlight outside. Then I heard the chair move, The scraping sound across the ground made my heart start pounding. A shadow appeared on the side of the tent. He was right outside. I held my breath, hoping maybe he would think the tent was empty. Then I heard the zipper. Very slowly. It began sliding downward. It only opened a few inches. At the bottom of most tents, there's a tiny gap where the zipper doesn't fully seal. I had never noticed it before that night. But through that small gap, I saw an eye. One single eye pressed against the opening, staring directly at me. For a few seconds, I couldn't even scream. My entire body was frozen. Then the zipper moved another inch, and that's when I finally screamed. I scrambled backwards and crashed into the tent poles as the whole tent shook. Outside, I suddenly heard footsteps running across the yard. At the same time, our back porch light turned on. My dad burst out of the house yelling and sprinted across the yard. But whoever the man was, he was already gone. My parents called the police that night. For weeks afterward, the whole experience haunted me. But just when things were starting to feel normal again, something even more disturbing happened. A few weeks later, during recess at my school, I was standing near the fence that separated the playground from the street. Suddenly, someone on the other side said, "Hey." I turned around. A man was standing there. He asked me for directions to a place nearby. I told him I didn't know. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. "Your name's Chris, right?" The sound of his voice felt horribly familiar. I quickly said no, even though I was lying. He smiled slightly and said, "You don't remember me, do you?" That was enough. I ran straight to a teacher, but by the time anyone looked toward the fence, the man was already gone. And to this day, I'm certain it was the same man from my backyard, because if he had managed to get inside that tent that night, there's a very good chance I wouldn't be here telling this story today.